Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Jeremy Fernandez. Tasmania has gone into a snap lockdown. New South Wales has scrapped hotel quarantine, while Victoria is enduring a record number of cases. There's no doubt the gap between Australia's states and territories has never been greater. As significant portions of the country open up and face Delta head-on, others are wanting no part in it for now. So how will this real-time experiment play out? Let's begin in Tasmania though. The Premier Peter Gutwein says an uncooperative quarantine escapee has led to his decision to introduce a snap 3-day lockdown for southern Tasmania.
We can't continue to wait another 2 days to find out more about what's been going on.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is broadly welcoming the decision by the New South Wales government to become the first jurisdiction to lift the requirements for quarantine for fully vaccinated travellers from the 1st of November.
I want to stress that for the other states and territories, and I've advised the premiers and chief ministers to this end, that this is about Australian residents and citizens first. The Commonwealth Government has made no decision to allow other visa holders, skilled visa holders, student visa holders, international visitors travelling under an ETA or other international visiting visa arrangement to come into Australia under these arrangements. They are decisions for the Commonwealth Government, as the Premier and I know.
So it's been a big day of developments. Let's bring in Casey Briggs. Casey.
Hi, Jeremy. Well, yeah, today has been the 15th of October. Friday the 15th of October is a day that's perfectly illustrated the difficulties of this transition period going forward into the coming months, with different states, with different case levels and different strategies going forward based on the outbreaks that they're looking at. Here's Tasmania's cases going right back to the beginning of the pandemic, and you can see virtually none of them since, well, in all year. We've only had a handful of cases, and for Tasmania, they're locking down the southern part of the state, not over local transmission in the state that they know of at the moment, but because of that hotel quarantine abscondee who's not been cooperative with authorities, and also another person, a contact of that person, who's breached home isolation rules. And it's a rational thing to do when you're the Tasmanian Premier. If you don't have COVID while you wait for your vaccination levels to pick up, wouldn't you do everything you can to avoid looking like having the sorts of outbreaks that we're seeing in 3 other states and territories? But then the approaches in those states and territories from their perspectives are totally rational as well. We've got Victoria and New South Wales and the ACT, which are no longer trying to eliminate this virus. They're trying to suppress and manage these cases as best they can while vaccination rates grow. And in Victoria's case, the battle to bend this curve downward has had another significant road bump this week, more than 2,000 cases on Thursday, and it seems like there's been a significant amount of undetected transmission going on that hasn't been caught. The vast majority of cases remain among the unvaccinated, and there's some real questions about where that spread has come from. But because of that, because new households are being infected, because this is infecting new parts of Melbourne, we should expect more days in the 2000s before this curve does start to turn around. And unfortunately, hospitalisation numbers and the numbers of people falling seriously ill and dying are still growing. This trend line is increasing. In New South Wales, well, they are past the absolute worst of this wave. The 7-day average continues to fall relatively reliably. 452 is the average, after on Friday just 399 local cases, a far cry from the numbers that we have been seeing. And there, the numbers of people dying are really improving. You can really see a real sustained improvement in the trend line there, despite 458 people having died through this wave. The speed of those numbers, the size of those numbers each day absolutely is going down. So New South Wales, perfectly rationally, is looking forward to the future as well, with the case numbers going down, vaccination rates looking like they will almost certainly hit 80% this weekend. Rules will ease for the second time in a week on Monday. And then, looking even further forward, the borders will considerably open from November, including allowing Australian citizens, permanent residents and their families to leave the country for the first time through this pandemic and return without any hotel quarantine, any quarantine at all, in fact. And that's led to what is really a transitional rocky period, because all of these border rules are now, throwing up some weird inconsistencies across the country that need to be resolved. Things like, in Sydney, you could go to Victoria next week, but you wouldn't be able to go to Wagga Wagga until the 1st of November, and sort of all of the difficulties that come along with that, and opening up the international borders when New South Wales is ready, but probably many of the other states, Jeremy, are not.
Casey, indeed, a lot of inconsistencies to look at. Thank you very much. So let's take a closer look at that now. Joining me is economist Nicki Hutley and Professor of Epidemiology at Melbourne University, Tony Blakely. Welcome to both of you. Tony Blakely, can I begin with you? We've seen Victoria record numbers of cases in the past week. Can you predict, based on the scientific modelling and what's happened in New South Wales, to any degree of certainty what this is going to look like in the coming weeks and months?
No. I've been reluctant to predict in Victoria because it all started out with a highly heterogeneity focused suburbs where it drove from. Then we had the combined protests and the AFL. Now we've got lack of compliance driving it. It's very hard to predict. But at some stage, the vaccine coverage will catch up with it, depending on our level of compliance. When you're in a sort of lockdown that we are now, a relatively soft lockdown, the vaccine coverage will catch at some point, but I really don't know when.
There's an important trend to mark here, Professor, and that's the decoupling between case numbers and the number of deaths. That's an important figure, isn't it?
Yeah, and amongst bad news, it's good news. So, for example, 6 weeks, 2 months ago in New South Wales, you'd roughly expect the daily case numbers to correspond to that many people in hospital on any given day in 10 days' time. But now we're seeing in Victoria that it's less because more of the infections shifted to the younger age groups because they're out there and about and they haven't been vaccinated yet. And to some small extent, we're starting to see some of the infections amongst the vaccinated which have less severe disease. So we're seeing that decoupling. What that means is that we can have infections go up to, say, I'm not advocating for this, up to 3,000, and you still perhaps only have 1,500 people in bed, hospital beds at any one point in time. That's not good, but it is at least a silver lining.
Nicki Hutley, can I bring you in here? The New South Wales government, while all this is taking place in Victoria, has been taking some huge steps towards facing COVID head on. Are you getting a sense of how well the New South Wales economy is likely to bounce back with this rapid opening up?
Well, I think the best thing for us to do is to look to the overseas examples as to how well they've done. And we can sort of see different examples or different outcomes in different countries according to how many case numbers they have, irrespective of the vaccination rates. And specifically, in the UK, for example, we haven't seen the bounce. We've seen some bounce back, but we certainly haven't seen as much as people had hoped for. Growth has inched forward in August, but only a little bit. Retail's still not back to pre-COVID levels. People are jumping on planes. Obviously, they're trying to do a bit more from the services side. Everyone here, of course, in New South Wales is rushing out for haircuts, but you kind of have one of those and then you don't rush around and have a second one the next day. Well, most people wouldn't. Obviously, Denmark is the one that people are pointing to as being the bright light, and certainly the numbers look a little bit better there. But again, it's really hard to tell because in all of these places, we're certainly seeing mobility increase, but in terms of the full economic impact, it's quite hard to gauge because we've got so much stimulus still flowing through the system, and it's hard to know what will happen when those training wheels of government support come fully off, how well the economies will do then. Business confidence, consumer confidence, that's usually one of the early indicators. How is that looking at this point? Well, surprisingly, actually not too bad. In fact, the last business confidence was up despite the fact that conditions were down. So I guess people are responding to the vaccine numbers rather than the case numbers. And I think that's the thing that we're all trying to adjust to. And there is a lot. I mean, I can hardly imagine what it's like living in Melbourne because 3 months in Sydney and I sort of feel a bit shell-shocked at the idea of going out there. It will take people a while to get used to the idea of living in this new COVID world, but we will adapt and we will adjust. It's just going to take a while for us to do so. Tony Blakely, part of this confidence comes from the vaccination rates, but as you know, 70% is not necessarily 70%. It doesn't include the whole population. It depends which neighbourhood, which state you live in. Under 11s are not counted in those figures at the moment. How quickly can those gaps be narrowed and how quickly does it need to be done?
Right. Well, we know from the UK, which has got 95% of adults immune for either natural infection or vaccine, the virus is still spreading, unfortunately. So we have to get that coverage up as high as possible. We actually need to start aiming for 95%. ACT's leading the example. They're doing great with the eligible population.
And can I just clarify, do you mean the whole population or over 16s?
Over 5-year-olds. I think it's inevitable that we will have Pfizer, Moderna, and other mRNA vaccines ready to go for 5+-year-olds soon. Now, we won't get all that population vaccinated to 90% or even 95% by Christmas, but we should be aiming to do that by February. The higher that vaccination coverage, the more room to move. So, for example, the Prime Minister today announced that people can come back without quarantine. You really need good vaccine coverage to do that. The modelling that I've led at the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health on pandemic trade-offs, it shows you that even though you've got, say, 1,000 people come back a day from a country like the UK, even if you've PCR tested them and they're vaccinated, they will still bring the infection in and it will drive the numbers up. So the more that you can get that vaccine coverage up to help us protect ourselves, the better.
Nicki Hutley, increasing numbers of companies, government agencies are now mandating vaccination. Where is that leaving employers and the workforce?
There are a lot of people who will feel quite nervous about this. There are, I know personal instances where people have said, there's one person who just won't get the vaccine. I'm not sure what to do. Obviously everyone's trying to bend over backwards to be as flexible as they can, but in some workforces, of course, it will be mandated. I think this is going to be a bit of a headache for business and for government for some time to come. It's not something that's easily resolved. There are issues. So obviously, the more people are vaccinated, it's just a no-brainer. The easier it is for all of us, the better for health and the better for the economy. And, I just point out again, as I have done for the last 18 or so months, those two are inextricably linked. You can't have a good economy unless you have a reasonable health outcome, and we have to have those side by side. So some tough decisions for people, because obviously not everybody can work at home and you can't necessarily have flexibility. I think it will create some headaches.
Tony Blakely, just quickly your thoughts on that.
We've moved a long way. There's been a big culture shift. This is quite extraordinary, the way that we're seeing essential industries like food processing, essential workers out in Victoria, they have to be vaccinated. It is causing some problems, but this is amazing culture change that will mean that we have a chance to go to 95% vaccine coverage. It's challenging ethically at times. There are difficult grey lines in here, but we are seeing a big change in how we view, let's call it obligate vaccination, because it's not quite mandatory.
Tony Blakely, Nicki Hutley, so good to have you both on the program. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. I hope that was useful.
Now, Dr. Norman Swan joins us now. Dr. Swan, what do you make of today's announcement from the New South Wales Premier that the borders are being thrown open?
Well, you give a little and you take a little. The announcement was open borders to everybody, and that was qualified later on in the day by the Prime Minister, saying Australian citizens, residents and their families to leave and to come back. Look, some of this is coloured by, if you look at the initial predictions of the national plan, it was kind of assumed there would be a plateauing at about 80%. So the plot has changed a bit because at 80%, we're still climbing to 90%. So for example, New South Wales, quite a clever decision to open on the Monday after 70%. So last Monday, or Monday this week, when New South Wales opened, it was already at 73, 74%. It was climbing. So you weren't opening at 70%, you were opening more than that. And you're absolutely right. It's far lower than that when you look at the whole population. And then when you come to 80%, we're still climbing to 90%. So we're doing well, but are we doing well enough to open the borders? So the positivity rate of people coming in is maybe 0.5%, 0.8%, something like that. So Tony Blakely's right. People will come in with the infection. PCR will not reliably detect them. And that will increase the caseload and increase the risk of variants coming in. And remember, variants are what could stuff us up in the medium term here moving forward. So there is an element of risk here. And of course, Dominic Perrottet has been one of the people in the New South Wales government pushing hard for rapid opening in New South Wales, resisted by Gladys Berejiklian, and now you're seeing it a bit unfettered. So there are risks, but maybe as we were saying a moment ago, Denmark has opened up with still some international restrictions, 10th of September, without a huge boom in cases. But remember, they've still got some restrictions on international travel there. But it's going well. And this disconnect with hospital, this decoupling that you're seeing with hospital admissions is good news, but Victoria is going to go through some bad times over the next 2 or 3 weeks because they've got large numbers flowing through, even at a lower rate, into the hospital system.
Norman Swan, good to talk to you. Thank you. And that is the show for this week. Thanks for your company. Bye for now.